Once upon a time, in the bustling city of Lagos, there lived a young man named David Okafor. By every outward appearance, David had everything people desired: wealth, power, status, and the respect of the business world. He was the CEO of a thriving investment company, a man whose name commanded attention in boardrooms and whose signature could seal million-dollar deals. But behind the fine suits, the luxury cars, and the polished image, there was a broken child hidden in the heart of David. His pain began in childhood. David was born into a well-to-do family. His father was an oil executive who traveled constantly, and his mother a successful fashion designer with shops across Lagos. They loved their only son, no doubt, but their love was often expressed through provisions rather than presents. They bought him the best toys, sent him to the finest schools, and hired a live-in house help to watch over him. At first, it seemed perfect, but this house help, a woman named Madam Fola, was far from kind. To his parents, she acted gentle, respectful, and diligent. But behind closed doors, she revealed a cruel streak. Whenever David made the slightest mistake, perhaps spilling his food, refusing to nap, or talking back, her punishment was simple yet terrifying. She would lock him in the dark storehouse behind the house. The store was a place filled with old furniture, dusty boxes, and the sharp smell of mothballs. It was pitch black once the door was closed, the kind of darkness that swallowed you whole. David would scream, cry, and pound on the wooden door. But Madam Fola never budged. "Since you like to behave badly," she would sneer, "stay there until you learn." Sometimes she left him for an hour, sometimes longer. Once, she forgot about him until night had fully fallen, and the boy sat shivering in the suffocating dark, listening to the scurrying of rats and the hum of insects. That night scared him the most. He remembered the way his breath grew short, how shadows in the dark seemed to take on monstrous shapes, and how helpless he felt with no one to rescue him. When his father finally returned from work and discovered him there, David thought he would be safe. But Madam Fola lied, saying the boy had locked himself in while playing. His father, exhausted and absent-minded, believed her. From then on, darkness became David's greatest enemy. He hated it, feared it, and carried the scars into his teenage years. Even as he grew taller, sharper, and more intelligent, he could not escape the memories. At night, he often woke up in cold sweat from nightmares of being trapped again. When light flickered during storms, his chest tightened. The trauma shaped him into a withdrawn, guarded young man. He learned not to trust easily, not to smile often, and not to let anyone close enough to see his wounds. But then, something happened that changed the course of his life, at least for a while. It was during his secondary school days. One humid afternoon, the clouds in Lagos gathered thick and heavy, promising a storm. David sat in his classroom, pretending to focus on the lessons, but already dreading the weather outside. As the winds picked up and the sky darkened, a sudden power outage threw the entire class into shadow. The generator had not yet kicked in, and the room filled with nervous chatter. For most students, it was nothing. For David, it was everything. His chest tightened, his palms grew clammy, and he struggled to breathe. He tried to steady himself, but memories of the storehouse flooded back. He tapped his desk, restless, his eyes darting around the dark room. He felt like a child again, trapped, helpless and alone. But then someone noticed. Grace Williams, a bright-eyed girl who had only recently joined the school, turned in her seat. She saw his restlessness, his trembling hands, his pale face. Without hesitation, she walked over, gently placed her hand over his, and gave him the warmest smile he had ever seen. "Are you afraid of the dark?" she whispered softly. David hesitated, ashamed, but then he nodded. Yes, terrible things happen in the dark. Grace squeezed his hand. Then remember this, you are not alone in the darkness, not anymore. Something in her tone, the sincerity in her eyes, broke through his fear. For the first time in years, he felt safe in the dark. Not because the darkness had changed, but because someone chose to stand with him in it. From that day forward, David and Grace became friends. She was the only person who could draw out his laughter, who could make him forget his fears even for a moment. They shared lunch breaks, exchanged notes, and even studied together. Grace had a light-hearted way about her. She teased him for being too serious, while he admired her ability to see beauty in small things. But just as quickly as she came into his life, she left. Grace's parents decided to move abroad in search of greener pastures. David remembered the day she told him they sat under a mango tree behind the school. The afternoon sun painting their faces gold. "I will be leaving next week," she said quietly. The word pierced his heart. "Leaving? For how long?" "I don't know. Maybe for a very long time," she replied, her eyes downcast. "My parents think it's best for us." David tried to speak, but his throat tightened. He had just begun to believe he wasn't alone anymore. And now the person who gave him hope was slipping away. "Don't forget me," he managed to say. Grace smiled gently. "How could I? You are my friends, and friends, they never really leave." But as the years passed, life proved otherwise. Grace left, and David was alone again. The boy grew into a man, carrying his trauma into adulthood. To cope, he threw himself into academics, then business. He became ruthless, calculating, and brilliant. By the time he was 35, he had built one of the most respected investment firms in Lagos. His name opened doors. His wealth brought him comfort, yet the emptiness remained. He avoided relationships, convinced no one would truly understand him. At night, he relied on sleeping pills to silence the nightmares. In social gatherings, he wore a mask of confidence, but behind closed doors, he battled shadows only he could see. Then fate intervened. One Monday morning, his company introduced a new secretary, an efficient, intelligent woman named Grace Williams. David froze when he saw her. It was the same Grace, the same smile, the same gentle eyes. But she did not recognize him. She greeted him with professional courtesy, oblivious to the boy he was once. David's heart twisted. He had waited years, carried memories of her kindness like a secret flame, but she had forgotten him, and so, instead of welcoming her, he grew cold and distant. He gave her impossible tasks, dismissed her suggestions, and snapped at her mistake. Grace, confused, wondered what he had done to deserve such treatment. Still, life had a way of breaking down his walls. One morning, Grace entered his office with a tray of coffee and a pile of documents. In a rush, she spilled hot coffee across his desk. David jumped up in anger. "Are you blind? Do you know how much this equipment costs?" He barked. Grace bowed slightly, cleaning the desk with quick hands, then met his eyes calmly. "I am sorry, sir, but don't you ever get tired of being angry all the time?" David froze. No one had ever dared speak to him like that. For a moment, he saw not his secretary but the same fearless girl from his past. He said nothing, but her words stayed with him long after she left. Another evening, David stayed back in the office to finish a major contract. To his surprise, Grace stayed too. "Why are you still here?" he asked sharply. "Because if you are here, my work isn't finished either," she said with a smile. Later that night, he found her asleep at her desk. He placed his jacket quietly around her shoulders before he left. She never knew, but the thought of that image often. On his birthday, David told no one. He despised celebrations, but Grace somehow discovered. She placed a small gift on his desk, a legal bookmark with his initials engraved. "It is nothing fancy," she said, "but a man who loves books should have a proper bookmark." David could only whisper, "Thank you." It was the first thoughtful gift he had ever received in years. One rainy evening, Lagos traffic was chaos. Grace was stranded at the office without an umbrella. To her shock, David appeared. "Come, I'll give you a ride." The drive was quiet until Grace softly hummed a hymn. David recognized it instantly. It was the same his grandmother sang to him in childhood, whenever fear gripped him. He turned, startled, and their eyes met. Neither spoke, but the air between them changed. One day, David faced an annoying problem. Angela, a famous celebrity known for her beauty and scandals, had become obsessed with him. She pursued him relentlessly, showing up at his office, sending expensive gifts, and making scenes. To push her away, David decided to send her flowers, an ironic gesture to close the chapter. "Grace," he ordered, "go to the florist and get a bouquet for Angela." Grace hesitated. "Sir, I'm allergic to flowers." "That's not my concern," he snapped. "Do as I say." Obedient, she went. By the time she returned, her eyes were red, her nose itchy, and tears streaming down her cheeks from the allergic reaction. She handed over the bouquet, exhausted. Angela, of course, flaunted the flowers all over social media, bragging about David's love. The office buzzed with gossip. Grace sat at her desk, wiping her eyes, hating the humiliation. David saw her tears and misunderstood. He thought she wept out of jealousy. A strange warmth stirred in him. The idea that perhaps she cared for him after all. But the truth was simpler. She was hurt. Hurt by his indifference. Hurt by his cruelty. And hurt that her boss seemed to despise her without reason. As weeks passed, the tension between them grew. Angela continued her schemes, cornering Grace at events, accusing her of stealing David's attention. Grace endured it quietly, though it tore her apart. Then came another turning point. One raining evening, the office lights went out during a storm. The generator delayed, plunging the building into darkness. David froze, his chest tightening, memories rushing back. He stumbled into his office, clutching his desk. His breath came shallow, his body trembling. Grace, sensing something was wrong, rushed in with a flashlight. She found him on the floor, pale and sweating. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Get the light back on," he gasped, his voice breaking. Without hesitation, she held his hand, just as she had all those years ago. "You are not alone in the darkness," she whispered. David's eyes widened. Those words, that voice in an instant, the years melted away. He looked at her not as a secretary, but as the girl who once saved him in a classroom storm. The realization broke him. Tears he buried for decades streamed down his face, and for the first time he told someone his truth. He told her about Madame Fola, about the storehouse, about the suffocating nights of fear. He told her how it shaped him, how it turned him into the man he was, successful yet haunted. Grace listened, tears in her eyes. "David," she said softly, "what they did to you was wrong, but you survived. You are stronger than you think. And you are not that little boy anymore. You are not alone." Her words began his healing journey. In the months that followed, Grace encouraged him to seek therapy. At first, he resisted, embarrassed. But slowly, with her support, it began. Each section chipped away at the walls around his heart. Each conversation with Grace reminded him that light could still pierce the darkest places. Angela eventually gave up, realizing David's heart belonged somewhere else. She tried one last desperate attempt at a gala, publicly confronting Grace. But David shocked everyone by defending his secretary. "Grace is the reason I stand tall today. She's not just my secretary, she's my light." Their bond deepened into love. He took her to dinners by the lagoon, long drive through Victoria Island traffic, where they laughed like teenagers, and quiet evening at the beach where the waves whispered promises. Grace became not just his secretary but his partner, his confidant, and the anchor he had longed for. Then one starry night, David planned a surprise. He invited close friends and family to a beautifully decorated rooftop in Ikoyi. Candles flickered, fairy lights twinkled, and soft music played. As Grace arrived, bewildered, David walked up to her. For once, there was no fear in his eyes, only gratitude and love. He took her hands. "Grace, years ago in a dark classroom, you held my hand and told me I wasn't alone in the darkness. Those words saved me, and today, I want to tell you the same. You will never be alone, not as long as I breathe. Grace Williams, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, David. Yes, David. Yes, David." 1,000 times yes. Cheers erupted, music swelled, and as he slipped the ring onto her finger, David knew the boy who once feared the dark had finally found his light. Did you enjoy this video? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share. See you in the next video.